Can we start? Le gavel. Je déclare ouverte la 7e.
The Assembly is declared open.
L'Assemblée va entendre.
The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Mr. Alar Karis, President of the Republic of Estonia. I request the protocol to escort His Excellency.
Au nom de l'Assemblée générale, j'ai l'honneur de souhaiter.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honour to welcome His Excellency Alar Karis, President of the Republic of Estonia, and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, let me first express my deep condolences to the people of Morocco who lost their close ones to the earthquake, and the people of Libya for their loss due to the catastrophic flooding. The world is constantly changing. We live through difficult times and glorious moments as human beings, as states and societies, as humankind, as global brother and sisterhood. On this path called history, we have learned that moments and situations do not repeat themselves fully. They rhyme. Our ability to learn from the past, to read the rhythm and flow of the verses of time, is a source of the progress. This gives us hope that the future rhymes will be nicer, that they will be free from the mistakes we have made before. We are different as humans, states and societies. But I am certain that some things are universal, like the simple wish for a better tomorrow, our sincere joy of doing good, feeling hope that somebody gives you a helping hand in the darkest moment and says that it is going to be all right. We are all entitled to live with dignity. We are all equal. Recognizing and accepting that is the foundation of freedom, justice and peace in the world as postulated by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. These are the things that unite us. These are the values upon which we must build our future. Our challenges are greatly common: ensuring sustainable peace and security, ending poverty, addressing climate change, finding best sustainable use for new technologies. Only nations with a united effort, with a shared vision, with an urge to understand each other in our differences, and with a readiness to compromise, are able to tackle the great challenges of our time. We know our world is facing diverse, intertwined crises reversing years of sustainable development gains. This is heartbreaking. As I had the privilege to address the SDG Summit on Monday, I want to focus on other equally important topics today. We have learned from the past mistakes. We have seen horrors and grave human suffering. We do not want to end up in a situation that rhyme with barbarity and cruelty. Humankind does not deserve war, death, aggression, and suppression. That is why sovereign states gathered 78 years ago and formed the United Nations. United Nations is really uniting nations. We have been trying to build a world where ones in need should be noticed and helped. We have learned to hear and accept various voices. We have been shaping the world that is based on freedom, justice, and rules. But this world is in danger. Regrettably, we see attempts to bend the rules or even ignore and forget them. We have witnessed ethnic cleansing against the Tigrayan population in Western Tigray, resulted in many deaths, sexual violence, mass detention, and forced displacement of thousands. We have heard the painful stories of slavery and murders in the Yazidi Kurds. Hundreds of thousands have been killed in the Yemen war. The humanitarian crisis is devastating. Famine, diseases are raging on. There are numerous violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. In Afghanistan, girls are denied their basic human rights, education. Would you accept this fate for your daughter? The Iranian population has lived for decades with severe limitations of fundamental rights. UN Office of the High Commission of Human Rights stated last year that there are serious human rights violations against Muslim minorities in Xinjiang region. And there are massive restrictions of fundamental rights of the people in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. These are not merely statistics, abstract passages in annual reports, but real and utterly tragic stories happening to our fellow citizens, to people like us. Like Anna, who worked in a shop in Kiev. When war started, she remembers constant running to different shelters, to schools, churches, houses nearby. Bombs were falling constantly, and one could only hope that explosions would stop. Shelters were overcrowded. Small babies, older men and women, cats, dogs. Everybody were nervous and shops were empty. With her daughter and cat, Anna decided to leave her hometown Kiev that were in flames. Like thousands of others running for their lives, Anna took a difficult journey and made it to Estonia, where she enjoys especially the sunsets and is amazed how quiet it is. Sometimes when it thunders, she prays, but it would be just a thunder. Russia escalated its aggression against Ukraine into a full-scale war already more than a year and a half ago. A UN Security Council permanent member, Russian Federation, is shamelessly destroying hospitals, kindergartens, grain storages, and schools as we speak. We have to be very clear. Russia invaded another sovereign country using fabricated pretext. The real reason for aggression against Ukraine lies in Russian neo-imperial and neo-colonial aspirations. Russia wants to destroy Ukraine, occupy it, and drain its resources to feed the ideology about its greatness. But what is there great about colonizing another country? The outcome of this war will greatly determine the future world. we and our kids are going to live in? Will it be dominated by brutal use of violence by those who commit crimes and destroy others? Or will be living in a world where law and order, justice and universally approved rules will prevail? What kind of lessons will be learning from Russian aggression? How can we discredit the aggression as a rogue tool of statecraft for generations to come? The answer is that Russia's political and military leadership must bear individual criminal responsibility for planning, launching and waging a war of aggression against Ukraine. It is a crime against peace. It is a crime of aggression. It's a leadership crime. Russia misuses its place in the Security Council and tries to convince the world that the black is white. But it is not. Lie is always a lie, no matter how nicely it sounds. Votes in the General Assembly have proven that there are less and less of those who tend to believe Russian lies. UN Charter says that the purpose of the UN is to prevent and remove the threats of peace and the suppression of acts of aggression. Russia has continuously breached this core principle. The fact that Russia is a member of the Security Council does not legitimize its actions. Crime is a crime anyway. Therefore, tribunal should be created, and if it's based on the suggestions from the General Assembly, it would have been desired international legitimacy. If we let the impunity to prevail, we put our own virtues and values, our moral norms under question mark. The whole concept of international trial and arbitration will be under threat. This undermines deeply the international law. This is why the international reaction and response to Russian crimes has an existential significance for us all. Dear ladies and gentlemen, the situation calls us to really use the tools at our disposal for protecting the international law based on the UN Charter. Therefore, we need to reform the UN Security Council. Now is the time, as the world is out of joint. Now is the time, as it has become more evident than ever. The Security Council is close to a dead end, unable to act and make decisions on the biggest conflicts in the heart of Europe after the Second World War. This undermines the UN Charter. Granting international peace and security is the raison d'etre of the Security Council. But instead of that, the Council is paralyzed. It has numerous negative implications globally, be it inability to offer conflict resolution or solutions concerning migration and food security. This dangerous tendency doesn't have its foundation in Russian aggression against Ukraine, but it has crystallized because of that. The world needs a Security Council that is able to fulfill its tasks and live up to the expectations of its founding members. But even more so, to give hope for better days to those suffering under fear, oppression, and violence. The ones responsible for aggression and conflicts have to face justice, even those with veto right in the Security Council. In order to make sure that the Security Council can fulfill the tasks set by the UN Charter, there is no alternative than to adjust the structure and working methods of the Security Council. And yes, this is possible, and we should gather up and raise the voices calling for the Security Council reform. Of course, it is hard. We are different in our positions. The reform has been on the table for many decades already. But instead of complaining how impossible the Security Council reform will be, let us make an extra effort towards it. We owe it to the starving, physically injured, mentally damaged, homeless boys and girls in Rakhine, Tigray, Syria, Yemen, Ukraine. Those children will be next. We need to stick together and protect the international law based on the UN Charter. If we cannot agree on all the reform ideas, let's concentrate on commonalities. Let's make the small steps that we can take already today. We all need to show some flexibility. Both issues, the composition of the Security Council and its working methods, have to be seriously addressed. It is time to abandon the well-known and documented group positions. We, as a united world community, need to start fresh. Let's turn blank page and work closely together to make a strong point that enough is enough. For the greater good, it would make perfect sense to take one step back from the old positions in order to move 3 steps ahead. Let's keep in mind what is at stake here. The central issue is, of course, using the veto right. There should be no veto right if there is a suspicion that the one who uses it may have acted itself against the international law. Estonia supports the proposal of Accountability, Coherence and Transparency Group to limit the veto rights in case of war crimes, crimes against humanity and crime of aggression. UN Charter stipulates in Chapter 5 that a party to a dispute shall abstain from voting in the Security Council. We call the Council to always implement this clause, like it was done in the early decades of United Nations. It is unacceptable if the aggressor is using the veto right and the Security Council is unable to act. In fact, there is a way out from letting a Security Council member to misuse its veto right. Let us use it. As the future composition of the Security Council, there should always be a fair distribution between continents and regions. Small, medium, and big states should be all represented. Only then will have the balanced council really addressing the world. In addition, the Security Council should be more transparent and open. That would immensely increase its efficiency. Building on that belief that the Security Council is able to maintain international peace and security will be restored. The world community has the right to know what was discussed at the Council. If a solution was clearly on the table and there was a member state who simply just blocked it, and by doing that increased the suffering of people, then it should be stated publicly. In a situation where the Security Council is unable to function as expected, it is definitely a positive development that the General Assembly has gained more prominence and influence on addressing the peace and security issue. We have seen it, for example, during the process of adopting Ukraine resolutions and implementing initiatives concerning veto right. We, in the General Assembly, should be able to collectively overcome the veto in the Security Council if the situation requires. Dear ladies and gentlemen, the concept of war and peace started to change already during the 19th century. War was gradually seen as a state of confusion or disorientation of mind. It became more and more clear that nobody actually wins from war or gains anything out of it. States started to understand that their national interests are better served in peacetime than in war. Peace generated welfare. After the world wars, the international community said, never again. United Nations was created to serve this exact purpose. The question we have to ask ourselves is, do we need another worldwide petition to create a new, better world order that is up to its tasks? Or are we wise and willing enough to use the international law to resolve the conflicts, to maintain peace and security? Are we heading towards the dark days or the glorious ones? This is entirely up to us. We are the ones determining the future. We are the ones responsible for it. But let's start from fixing the Security Council. Thank you very much.
Au nom de l'Assemblée générale, je tiens
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Estonia for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Azali Assoumani, President of the Union of the Comoros. I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
Au nom de l'Assemblée générale, j'ai l'honneur de souhaiter la bienvenue à son Excellence.
On behalf of the Assembly, I welcome His Excellency Mr. Azali Assoumani, President of the Union of the Comoros, and I invite him to take the floor.
President of the General Assembly, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Majesties, Highnesses, Excellencies, heads of governments, distinguished representatives of countries and institutions. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah ta'ala wa barakatuh. It is a real pleasure for me to address you here today, and I would like to first thank the American authorities. We thank you very warmly for the warm welcome that we see every time we are here in New York in order to participate in this great annual gathering of the international community. Next, I would like to express my very warm congratulations to His Excellency Mr. Dennis Francis and congratulate him on being brilliantly elected to preside over the 78th session of a regular session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. And I'm all the more happy to do so since this is a distinguished representative of an island developing state. My country is one as well, and we now have such a person assuming a high office. There's no doubt, Your Excellency, that your professional qualities and your experience, together with the particular sensitivity you have when it comes to development issues, which is a characteristic of a person coming from an island, will be a token of success of this current session. I would like to also use this opportunity to pay a much-deserved tribute to your predecessor, His Excellency Mr. Csaba Kőrösi. Congratulate him on the effectiveness with which he has discharged his high duty on behalf of us all. And finally, I would like to, on behalf of my country and the African Union, express all of my thanks to His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations. We thank him for his constant engagement in the engagement of all of his teams in the service of our common institution for the benefit of one and all. Distinguished delegates, as a chairperson of the African Union, I would like to today, in front of this august assembly, express the voice of all of the African states. It continues believing in fair and more effective multilateralism because it is more inclusive and therefore can help bring about longed-for deep changes that we all wish for because we want a better life for the continent and the entire world. And this will be realized, we are convinced, in an in-depth reform of the United Nations system. Africa, where 3.8 billion people will live by the end of this century, intends to play a crucial role in attaining the SDGs, and therefore has the right to participate in global decision-making bodies and to, inter alia, be on the Security Council as a permanent member and thus realize its rights in line with the Essolvini Consensus. It is a question of equity. This reform of the United Nations that Africa has been asking for loudly and clearly, but it's also a question of effectiveness, because it becomes a matter of legitimacy and therefore of the effectiveness of multilateralism. I would like to furthermore use this opportunity so as to reiterate on behalf of Africa our thanks, very sincere thanks, to the members of the G20 who have just integrated the African Union, which it is my honor to chair in this year 2023, within their group. And this diplomatic victory for Africa, but also for the G20, through India, where this historic decision was enacted, gives us hope, especially at the time where a synergy of actions is needed in order to get our countries out of the socio-economic stalemate. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this 78th General Assembly, rebuilding trust and reigniting global solidarity, accelerating action of the 2030 Agenda and its Sustainable Development Goals towards peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all, this theme is very timely. The African continent is facing numerous challenges, and there is a danger that these challenges can compromise its future. And I think that the trust and the solidarity which has pride of place this year will provide us with the solutions which are adequate for our concerns. We are dealing with the challenge of food security, which is becoming wider and wider spread in the continent, despite the fact that we have immense arable lands on the continent, despite the fact that we have qualified and competent labor aplenty. Despite this, food insecurity continues affecting millions of people. Climate change and the numerous conflicts on the continent compound this situation, as does the Russian-Ukrainian war, which brought in its wake the disruption of supplies of grain and fertilizer, and also brought in its wake an unprecedented inflation. You will agree with me that it's inconceivable that with all of these arable lands, the continent remains a major importer of agricultural goods, and this contributes towards us creating a sizable shortfall in its trade balance. Therefore, at the time when we're talking about solidarity, it is time for all partnerships amongst African governments, development bodies, private sector, both foreign and domestic, be strengthened so as to rise to this challenge and resolve it effectively and in a lasting fashion. It is also high time for our partners to support us in implementing far-reaching reforms, such as, for example, the transfer of expertise and technology, so as to help those countries which are severely affected, help us promote agricultural development, and more specifically, produce and transform our goods locally, thus adding value to them and helping us combat shortages and famine. We also need to strengthen our fight against climate change because, and we live through it, all of us, our planet is constantly dealing with various climate events, and more specifically cyclones, floods, earthquakes, rising waters, droughts, and the list is far from exhaustive. Frequent disasters, of course, have devastating effects on our economies, on our social infrastructure, on our agriculture, and on our people, in particular the most vulnerable, and brings in its wake public health crises, which further underscore the vulnerability of the continent. I would like to use this opportunity to renew our deep condolences and also our solidarity to our brothers in the Kingdom of Morocco and in Libya. Their country have just suffered enormous human losses and material damages in the wake of such natural disasters. I'm also thinking of the many countries in Europe and Asia and in America who are hard hit by the devastating consequences of forest fires, of floods, and storms. Above and beyond the numerous human losses, the damages resulting from these catastrophes require the cost of rebuilding and recovery, which is not always something that our countries can sustain. I therefore call upon the international community to promote communal approaches, better structured and adapted, and especially within the framework of funding, to meet these disasters on a large scale so that we can provide our people with the support that they need and help them recover. And especially, I call for the effective implementation of the recommendations having to do with the protection and safeguarding of the environment, for the implementation of the commitments undertaken in the area of adaptation and mitigation. The lowering of the level of the greenhouse effects and the funding pledged to combat climate change have to, in fact, be translated in specific actions if we want to live in future in a world which is safer and more prosperous. I call, therefore, for support to the Moroni Declaration issued last June on blue economy and the Nairobi Declaration of last September, and this to make sure that the countries can defend with one voice their common interests and helps develop sustainably, in particular to do this during the upcoming COP28 in Dubai, to which we would like to wish every success. And finally, I would like to launch an appeal to strengthen the capacities of UN Habitat. I'm asking for more substantial support in the implementation of the new urban agenda so that this agenda can better support our African cities, which are full of potential, but which have become very vulnerable to climate change. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot talk about the challenges of the African continent without talking about the political and security situation and complex and worrying situation on our continent, and in particular in the Sahel. As we all know, the Sahel, this region of Africa, which since 2010 has been seriously affected by insecurity and terrorism. There are terrorist groups who have intensified their attacks against security forces, but also against civilians and civilian infrastructure. It is urgent, therefore, that the international community should strengthen its efforts aimed at accompanying us in our attempts to stabilize this region, knowing that the global planetary village in which we all live, that on this planet, crises are very easily imported and therefore have consequences on economies and the investment within and between countries. Of course, first and foremost, it's up to the Africans to implement the economic and social development plans within the framework of Agenda 2063, so as to better combat poverty and youth unemployment, but especially to make sure that the young people do not become hostages to all kinds of extremism. However, it is also the duty of the international community to support Africa in this action, because our efforts need to be pooled if we are to stand the chance of being effective. In addition to terrorism, unfortunately, Africa is also facing the resurgence of anti-constitutional changes. They compromise and undermine democracy, peace, security, stability, and our socio-economic development. And it is in this regard that the African Union has undertaken sanctions against those who commit such acts, and demands a rapid return to constitutional order in the countries concerned. And I would like to here recall solemnly that a political life worthy of its name is not possible without respecting electoral timetables and legitimate institutional mechanisms which undergird a democratic public life. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, Africa, of course, is under all these pressures, but we are fighting for our regional integration to stop the economic stalemate. The economic shocks that our countries underwent, in particular inflation and logistical and food crises, have seriously affected our growth potential, our daily life for our people, and the stability of our states. And it is in this regard that since 2021, we have been implementing the African Continental Free Exchange Area, a major continental common market, and this is with a hope to give new impetus to growth and African GDP. Having this tool at our disposal, it is my task to accelerate during the time that I'm chairperson of the AU for the continent, and using this tool to create the needed wealth to better handle our demographic growth. This area will contribute to the implementation of our common ambition to move towards industrializing the continent, because Africa has to stop being a simple provider of raw materials. Whilst enabling us to strengthen our secondary and tertiary sectors to create jobs, the common market area on the continent would also stimulate technology transfer and promote foreign investment, because it will open for other continent immediate access to a market of more than 1 billion people. And here I would like to reiterate our request for support and strengthening of a strategic partnership between Africa and the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, even making its institutional and put together a joint AU-CELAC commission. This partnership will not only strengthen cooperations between South-South, but in the mutual interest of our states, it would also help us to capitalize on the partnership with our friends and brothers in the North. Similarly to the rest of the world, African countries need more than ever peace and security to be able to have better living conditions. Peace and development will also result through resolving our political and territorial problems which have to do with the sovereignty of states and the dignity of nations. It was these concerns that pushed us, me and my African partners, to go to a meeting with President Zelensky and Putin within the framework of the mission for African peace last June in Kiev and St. Petersburg, respectively. We therefore stand ready to support any and all other initiatives aimed at ending this war, which negatively impacts our goals to increase the well-being of our people. Let me also reiterate, once again, with the goal of safeguarding peace and stability, and on behalf of the African Union, that there is a high need to come up with a just and fair solution to the issue of Palestine, a solution which would enshrine the right of the Palestinian people to have a sovereign state living in perfect harmony and security with the State of Israel. I would like to recall here also very solemnly, as chairperson of the African Union and the Union of the Comoros, the Comorian nature of the Île of Mayotte. And I recall that in order to move forward on this, we opted for a dialogue with the French party, so as to find a solution to this disagreeable dispute, and to do so in the interest of both countries. I would like to underscore my determination, a determination of my government, to honor the institutions and the democratic life in the Comoros by organizing free, transparent, and democratic upcoming presidential elections and governors' elections in 2024. I would like to also recall that the Union of the Comoros managed to put an end to this cycle of political instability, which used to be the characteristic of our political life since independence in 1975. And this was done thanks to the policy of national reconciliation that I have been conducting since 2000. This policy of reconciliation, supported by the African Union, the United Nations, and all of our partners, have brought stability to the country, and it is our duty to build on it and to sustain it. Since 2002, in fact, the date of the 26th of May have become a symbolic date of the transfer of power in the Comoros, because it is on this date we have the transfer of power as resulting from free and transparent presidential elections. It is with this concern in mind, the concern to preserve peace and stability and democracy in the Union of the Comoros, that I am asking once again for your support and your accompaniment so that the upcoming presidential elections and the election of governors planned for the month of December and January next should be conducted under good conditions. To conclude, let me say that I am confident that on the 26th of May 2024, we will once again celebrate the political maturity of the people of the Comoros, and that the inauguration ceremony of the next president of the Union of the Comoros will symbolize the deep rootedness and the strength of our democracy. I thank you.
Au nom de l'Assemblée générale, je tiens
On behalf of the General Assembly, I would like the President of the Union of the Comoros for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
l'Assemblée va entendre l'allocution de son
Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Luis Rodolfo Abinader Corona, President of the Dominican Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
Au nom de l'Assemblée,
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Luis Rodolfo Abinader Corona, President of the Dominican Republic, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Excelentísimo señor Denis Francis,
Your Excellency, Mr. Denis Francis, President of the 78th Regular Session of the General Assembly of the United Nations, Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Heads of State and Government, Honourable Heads of Delegation, ladies and gentlemen. As we enter the second decade of the 21st century, humanity faces inherited challenges and new obstacles that require action. We must see these calamities as opportunities that compel us to work together to overcome them. The Dominican Republic has the firm commitment that we can build a model of inclusive human development that is just and sustainable. However, it is legitimate for us to wonder whether we are really on track to achieve such an outcome. The various crises caused by climate change have had devastating impacts on our planet and societies, such as droughts, rising sea levels, loss of biodiversity, extreme weather events, amongst others. These impacts have generated an environmental liability that significantly threatens all of the progress achieved in recent decades. As a developing economy with a negative carbon footprint, we are making our contribution to mitigating climate change by incentivizing the use of renewable energies. But we know that this is only one step on the long road to sustainability, because we still have significant dependence on fossil fuels. Oil is still important to us. I take this opportunity to draw attention to the practice of supply control by exporting countries in order to keep crude oil prices high to the detriment of importing countries. In this Assembly, representative of all, we should discuss and approve a financial mechanism to guarantee the stability of crude oil prices for low and middle income importing countries such as mine. Important steps have been taken to address the climate emergency, such as the recent adoption of the Convention for the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Marine Biological Diversity in Areas Beyond National Jurisdiction, known as BBNJ, a convention which I will be signing this afternoon. But many more and far more significant steps remain outstanding, such as adopting a multidimensional vulnerability index, MVI, applicable to all developing countries, or the implementation of the Loss and Damage Fund to provide financial assistance to the nations most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. I would also like to highlight the International Summit to be held in Antigua and Barbuda in May 2024 on small island developing states, in which our country will be present as a member of the Preparatory Committee. It is also urgent to create a concessional financing mechanism for middle-income countries so they can meet the challenges of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs 2015-2030. The lack of access to adequate resources was one of the reasons why many countries failed to meet the Millennium Development Goals. As the Secretary-General has stated, the international financial system is broken. The Dominican Republic strongly believes in an in-depth reform of the international financial architecture that could benefit all countries in an equitable way. Another of the harmful effects of climate change affects in particular our Caribbean region. Here I am referring to the massive proliferation of sargassum. This seaweed devours Caribbean coasts, including the coasts of the United States and Mexico, and has serious economic, social and environmental impacts, especially for tourism, which represents up to 75% of some Caribbean nations' economies. The Dominican Republic has created a multi-sectoral roundtable to deal with this problem, and we hope that developed countries will contribute to the solution. Mr. President, one of the pillars of our commitment to achieve a fairer social contract and a more effective state has been, and will always be, the fight against corruption. Dominican citizens have taken this on as a response to one of their main demands. The various international indicators on the perception of corruption confirm the progress that my government has made in this regard. On a different matter, I would like to take this opportunity before this Assembly to reiterate the Dominican Republic's candidacy for the UN Human Rights Council for the period 2024-26. Elections will be held next month. This candidacy represents our firm commitment to the defence of human rights. Distinguished colleagues, looking at the island of Hispaniola from space, you could do this on your mobile phone, for example, using Google Earth, you can see a palpable and heart-wrenching difference. One half of the island is green and flourishing. That is the Dominican Republic, which has prioritized the conservation and sustainable management of its natural resources. The other half is devoid of that rich forest cover. This is a reflection of Haiti's dramatic deforested landscape. This natural frontier is not only a geography lesson, it is a potent reminder of what awaits the world if we continue to ignore nature's alarms. Ladies and gentlemen, Haiti today suffers not only from an environmental tragedy, but also from political and social instability that may become a threat to the entire region. I am not happy to have to recall the call I made 2 years ago to this General Assembly when I said, since this government took office, we have been warning of the possibility that the Haitian situation could spill over its borders into our country, becoming a factor of insecurity for the entire region. That is why this community of nations, once and for all, has to take up the Haitian issue at the highest level of priority with permanent monitoring. Today, 2 years later, the harsh reality of that warning is coming home to roost. a small group of Haitian private individuals have resumed the construction of an illegal diversion canal in Haitian territory to extract water from the Dajabon River in violation of border treaties between our two countries. The international community should realize that the Dajabon River originates in Loma de Cabrera and most of its 55 kilometers run through our territory before emptying out into Bay of Montanillo in Montecristi. Only 2 kilometers run through Haitian territory. It is in that small stretch on the Haitian side that a canal is being dug. The information available to us indicates that this is a maneuver to control the water by a small economic political elite in order to profit from its sale to small producers in the area. The idea behind this project has never been officially communicated to the Dominican government, nor has documentation been provided on its scope, environmental impact, or the identity of its final beneficiaries. Despite the highly limited information available, our analysis shows that the project puts at risk access to water for hundreds of Dominican and Haitian farming families downstream of the canal's construction site. Moreover, the project puts at risk of flooding an industrial park which is 300 meters downstream from the canal, as well as 19,000 Haitian workers in Mendez, as well as inhabitants in the border towns of Dajabon and Juana Mendez. Additionally, it would have harmful ecological impacts affecting Saladillo Lagoon, one of the main wetlands in the Dominican Republic. Since April 2021, our government has repeatedly sought for the Haitian authorities to stop the unilateral and illegal construction of this project. The Haitian government itself has indicated that it is not a government-run project, but it has not been able to stop it because of institutional weakness and the public order and security crisis ongoing in that country. The situation has already led to a fragile animosity on both sides of the border. Faced with this illegal international act committed by private individuals in a part of the river that is on Haitian territory, the Dominican government has been forced to take forceful measures, such as closing the border with Haiti, in order to guarantee security and our national interest, as well as to protect our rivers, environment, and agricultural production. We do not have, nor do we seek or desire, a confrontation with the Haitian people, but we face uncontrollable actors who foment insecurity in Haiti for their particular interests and who are now conspiring against their own government's stability and the security of water resources. Mr. President, there can be no doubt that the problem of Haiti is no longer just in Haiti. It is in the hands of the international community. That is why we strongly support the responsible position of the President of the United States, Mr. Joe Biden, expressed yesterday from this rostrum, and which we will repeat now. The Security Council must authorize urgently the UN-backed security mission as a matter of urgency. The Security Council has already passed 3 important resolutions creating a sanctions regime, an effort to stop the illicit flow of arms, and a call for the creation of a multinational force to assist the Haitian National Police as requested by the government of that country and the Secretary General of this organization. We applaud Kenya's major gesture of solidarity in leading the multinational force, as well as the gestures of Jamaica and Bahamas in providing personnel. I take this opportunity to thank in particular the President of Kenya, William Ruto, for his solidarity and humanitarian willingness to lead, via that mission, the search for peace and stability for the Haitian people. Moreover, we urge all those countries that are considering playing a role in this commendable effort to act with determination. What is happening in Haiti is a breakdown of law and order caused by criminal elements without any political or ideological claims, and therefore welcoming the Haitian authorities' request for assistance by sending a multinational force would be in keeping with the spirit and the letter of the United Nations Charter and the mandate of this organization, in accordance with international law as a way of guaranteeing the peace. We are all aware that the process of achieving peace in Haiti must be undertaken together with a social and political agreement. In this regard, we commend the noble efforts made by the CARICOM group of eminent leaders to reach a political agreement that will allow the greatest possible legitimacy of the acceptance of a multinational force and the holding of fair, free and transparent elections. In this regard, I wish to acknowledge Prime Minister Andrew Holness of Jamaica for all of his efforts. I also wish to thank the Secretary-General for his work in addressing this crisis. We call on him to redouble those efforts to achieve the immediate deployment of a multinational force in Haiti. We also call on the Security Council to pass a resolution as outlined already, and to do it now, because time has run out. Mr. President, for centuries of often difficult coexistence with the Haitian people, the Dominican Republic has given clear signs of untiring solidarity. Haiti has significant needs. I would like to reiterate our solidarity with the Haitian people, but without forgetting that our main responsibility is to defend the interests of the Dominican people. That is what we have always done. That is what we are doing now, and you can rest assured that that is what we will continue to do, because there is no and never can be a Dominican solution to the Haitian problem. Ladies and gentlemen, let us not wait for the next warming to be the story of a tragedy foretold. At this session of the General Assembly, we should mark a renaissance in our collective determination to forge a more secure, inclusive and sustainable future for Haiti and for all. I would make one final call. The current global scenario challenges us to act not only as individual nations, but as a united world with a shared vision and common purpose. History will judge us not just for the words which we pronounce in these hallowed halls, but more crucially, for our actions on the ground. Let's not fail the future. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Dominican Republic for the statement just made, and I request Protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Maya Sandu, President of the Republic of Moldova. I request Protocol to escort Her Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome Her Excellency Maya Sandu, President of the Republic of Moldova, and to invite her to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Your Excellencies, it is with great pride that I once more stand before you at the General Assembly of the United Nations to represent the Republic of Moldova, a country on the front line of the fight for democracy. Today, Moldova stands stronger and more resilient than a year ago. We stand firm in our belief in a democratic future, and we stand firm with Ukraine as our neighbor continues to resist Russia's brutal invasion, an attack on its sovereignty and way of life. We stand firmly for Ukraine's victory, because when Ukraine wins, the free world wins. Now, more than ever, support for Ukraine must not diminish. Please continue supporting Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, Ukraine, Moldova, Europe, and the free world are facing an external assault on our values. But countries like mine haven't broken free from imperial chains only to be brought back into servitude. We push forward. We are not facing an imminent military threat, unlike our Ukrainian friends and neighbors. But every day, we are countering Russia's hybrid assault. Russia has teamed up with corrupt crooks to destabilize us. Their hybrid toolbox includes energy blackmail, support for separatism, cyber attacks, and disinformation campaigns. They also tried to overthrow our democratically elected government, but each time they failed. We know they will try again. In soon-to-be-held elections, they will attempt to undermine our citizens' ability to make their own democratic choice. This threat is not unique to us. Many countries in Europe and beyond our continent are feeling the sting of foreign interference in their democratic processes. This hybrid assault is conducted by those who oppose not just our democracy, but all liberal democracies. We must stay vigilant, and we must stand united. Distinguished audience, against all odds, we preserved peace across all of Moldova, including in the breakaway Transnistrian region, where Russian troops are stationed illegally and where concerns about human rights violations are deeply worrying. Our commitment to a peaceful resolution remains steadfast, and I call here today for the unconditional withdrawal of those Russian forces. In light of intertwined challenges, building Moldova's resilience has not been an easy task. Yet, we take heart in the fact that Moldova is not alone. Our friends and partners, the entire free world, stand with us. Building resilience means that Moldova has moved from relying solely on Russian gas to having a mix of energy sources and backup storage. We are also building electricity lines to Europe, investing in energy efficiency, and pursuing renewable sources. The true measure of a democracy's success rests in its ability to deliver a better life and real economic benefits to citizens. Strengthening our economy as the war rages across the border is a daunting challenge, but we are determined. Small and medium-sized enterprises can now access funds to grow. Digital public services are helping to cut red tape. The EU market is open to exports of our fruit and vegetables. Inflation is down to 10% from a peak of 35% last October. A major ratings agency has upgraded our outlook to stable. We are comprehensively reforming the justice system, redoubling our efforts to defeat corruption and organized crime. Part of this effort is reducing the malign influence of fugitive oligarchs who at one time captured our state. I'm grateful to many of you in this room for imposing sanctions on those individuals. The next critical step in this journey is to ensure that the stolen money is returned to the Moldovan people. As evidence of our commitment on corruption perception, as measured by Transparency International, we improved by 24 places in the past 2 years, our best score in a decade. On the Rule of Law Index, part of the World Justice Project, we have advanced by 14 places since 2020. Greater resilience will also come through enhanced transport links with Europe, vitally important given Russia's blockade of Ukrainian ports and the disruption of trade routes. We are upgrading roads and railways, and this modernized infrastructure will not only boost our trade and create jobs, but will support solidarity lanes for Ukraine, ensuring that its grain reaches the regions where it's needed most. And one day, these very connections will be aiding Ukraine's post-war reconstruction. As we build up defenses and resilience, Moldova is increasingly recognized as a contributor to regional security, a strong neighbor to Ukraine and partner to the EU in countering security challenges. But our commitment extends globally. Moldovan servicemen actively contribute to peacekeeping missions, including most recently in the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon. Underscoring our commitment to the security of our continent, we hosted the European Political Community Summit last June, a summit that further cemented our place in the European family. Ladies and gentlemen, economic progress, improving security, and reinforcing our democracy are part of our journey towards membership of the European Union. Moldova's European aspirations have long been well known. Last May, 100,000 Moldovans rallied in Chisinau to reassert their commitment to democracy and to EU membership. Let me be clear. Moldova's EU membership is not just a political choice. It is the only way to protect our liberty, peace, and democracy. The enlargement of the EU is the sole path to ensure our neighborhood stays anchored in the free world and that we deliver better lives for our citizens. It would also demonstrate the Union's commitment to peace, the very reason the European Union was built. When it comes to membership, we believe in a fair and merit-driven process and have been doing our work diligently. With this in mind, I call on the European Commission and all EU members to support us. I extend this call beyond the EU borders to all the countries of the free world, especially those with well-established, robust democracies who have long reaped its benefits and understand its worth. The success or downfall of one democracy resonates globally. When one thrives, it inspires hope in others. When one falters, it risks a domino effect. Today, the fight for democracy anywhere is the fight for democracy everywhere. And in this interlinked fight for democracy, we will prevail. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Moldova for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort Her Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Your Excellency Denis Francis, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, colleague heads of states and government, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Your Excellency, permit me to extend my heartfelt congratulations on your auspicious assumption of the presidency of the 78th session of the General Assembly. My delegation and I stand unwaveringly by your side, committed to fortifying the bedrock of global unity during your tenure. I offer my profound respect and gratitude to your predecessor, Mr. Csaba Kőrösi of Hungary, whose depth stewardship of the 77th session is a guiding beacon for all. To our esteemed Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres. Your dedication to weaving together the strands of global consensus for battling poverty, planetary crisis, and championing sustainable development goal is a testament to your leadership. Mr. President, the soul of Sierra Leone, echoing the spirit of Pan-Africanism, resonates with the clarion call of this year's theme: rebuild trust and reignite global solidarity. A testament to our enduring democratic spirit was showcased on June 24th, when in free, fair, and peaceful multi-tier elections, the Sierra Leonean people elected their leaders across various tiers of governance. My re-election as president for a second final term serves not merely as an endorsement of my leadership, but a solemn testament to my government's commitment to fashioning a Sierra Leone that thrives as a united, peaceful, and dynamic bastion of hope and opportunity. A nation where our aspirations for abundant jobs, food security, quality education, and equitable healthcare are not mere dreams, but manifest realities, where justice and opportunities are not mere prerogatives of a few, but the birthright of all. Mr. President, in the face of global upheavals, from the pandemic to geopolitical tensions exemplified by the war in Ukraine and the ensuing food crisis, my first term stood as a beacon of our commitment to democratic freedoms and human rights. We rooted out the unpleasant legacies of the past, repealing antiquated laws such as the seditious libel statute that lingered for half a century. We consigned the death penalty to the annals of history and charted bold advances against the scourge of corruption. Our devotion to education was unambiguous. Over 800,000 new learners were introduced under our aegis, and we significantly augmented domestic educational funding, ensuring it constituted an average of 22% of our national budget. We champion an ethos of radical inclusion, providing unfettered and tuition-free access to quality primary and secondary school education for all. In our unwavering commitment to dismantle the barriers of gender inequality, my administration declared a state of emergency on the heinous crime of rape and sexual and gender-based violence. Sierra Leone urged the global community for solidarity on access to justice and remedies for survivors of sexual violence and the recognition of November 18 by this General Assembly as World Day for the prevention of healing from sexual exploitation, abuse, and violence. Our Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act of 2022 shows our commitment to equality. With this act, I've proudly inscribed our nation's pledge to reserve a minimum of 30% of seats in elected and appointed offices for women, ensuring equal employment opportunities, lengthening maternity leaves, and compelling our financial institutions to chart pathways that amplify women's access to financial resources that they so rightfully deserve. As I step into my second term, Mr. President, my government has carved out 5 pillars that guide our national development trajectory to spur sustainable development and social progress. Food security. 1, food security, intertwined with investment in agriculture, is poised to not just to feed our nation, but to fear job creation, propel economic growth, and alleviate the weight of poverty. 2, human capital development, meticulously crafted for the modern era with a special lens for gender equality. 3, youth employment scheme. This promises our younger generation that their energy, passion, and ambition will find fertile ground in Sierra Leone. 4, cutting-edge technology and infrastructure program. This is conceptualized to pave sustainable pathways of economic ascent. And a thorough revamp of public service architecture, refining its essence for utmost efficiency, professionalism, and service delivery. SDGs towards peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all. Mr. President, 78 years ago, the United Nations was born from the profound understanding that peace, development, and human rights are inextricably intertwined. Each element nourishes the other, creating an equilibrium essential for global harmony. As we stand at this juncture, let us remember that the noble ambitions enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations to foster international cooperation, to confront and surmount challenges, be they economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian in nature. It is in unity and shared purpose that the promise of a brighter, just, and peaceful world is realized. The resonant theme of this General Assembly, therefore, opens a horizon of possibilities, beckoning us to harmoniously forge ahead in the shared pursuit of accelerating actions on the 2030 Agenda and its sustainable development goals towards peace, prosperity, progress, and enduring sustainability for all. Our world faces formidable challenges: widespread poverty, persistent hunger, the looming shadow of climate change, and the unsettling presence of sustained and emerging conflicts. To honor our 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development commitments, member states of the United Nations must rekindle the fires of trust and galvanize a renaissance of global solidarity. Trust requires a harmonious amalgamation of our collective wisdom and resources. Solidarity mandates our unwavering cohesion, even when navigating different and opposing philosophical terrains. In pursuing the 2030 Agenda, we must resolve to leave no one behind. We must fervently champion inclusivity, recognizing the intrinsic value of every individual, irrespective of their circumstances. Progress has been made, but we acknowledge that the road ahead is challenging. However, this challenge also presents an opportunity for innovation and collaboration and reimagining our global priorities. ECOWAS regional peace and security. Mr. President, we view with deep concern the rising tides of insecurity and the subtle erosion of democratic governance and ideas in the West African sub-region and the Sahel. Sierra Leone raises its voice alongside our ECOWAS allies, expressing unequivocal dissent towards an extra-constitutional changes of government. Such challenges to the very bedrock of our democracy threaten the stability of individual nations and the fabric of our collective African identity. While we stand united, it is not simply a call to maintain things as they are. Real stability and lasting peace don't come from resisting threats or building defenses. Instead, they arise from genuine, open conversations. True dialogue requires that everyone at the negotiating table must be ready to seek and find common ground. While we emphasize the importance of dialogue, we cannot ignore the crucial reality. The ongoing threats to our continent's constitutional stability are signs of deeper problems. Every action that undermines the rule of law is connected to underlying issues. These range from past and present injustices to the burden of poverty, widespread unemployment, and the dangers of discrimination. Our duty is clear. We must lift our people from poverty. We should focus on creating jobs and supporting industries that benefit our countries and our continent. Mr. President, national electoral reforms. Elections as vehicles of democratic transformation fortify governance and allow peaceful transitions. After our nation's multi-tier elections on June 24th, we stand resolved to strengthen our democratic foundation, recognizing the significance of deepening our democracy. I have instituted a National Electoral Systems Review Committee to address historical challenges to our electoral processes. Since our first multi-tier elections were conducted after the Civil War in 2002, the electioneering process has been plagued with persistent challenges, including contestations of declared presidential election results by the constitutionally mandated Electoral Commissioner. To address these historical challenges and consolidate our democratic gains, a comprehensive review of the electoral system is necessary to reform Sierra Leone's electoral landscape. The National Electoral Systems Review Committee will comprise the government, civil society, political parties, professional organizations, and development partners. It holds the mantle of evaluating existing frameworks, institutional arrangements, and observer mission reports. Its mandate extends to proposing vital reforms fortifying Sierra Leone's electoral integrity. These actions encapsulate our commitment to forging a fertile environment for dialogue, affirming democratic governance, and fostering enduring peace. Mr. President, it is regrettable to note the decision of certain member states to introduce unilateral cohesive measures, including visa restrictions on Sierra Leonean citizens following the recent multi-tier national elections. We observe that such unilateral measures, which are in contravention of international law, have sometimes been the response to electoral outcomes in other African nations to exert political pressure. As members of the international rules-based community, African states strive for sovereignty and meaningful cooperation based on mutual respect and understanding. In democratic processes, every democracy faces unique challenges. However, the essence of sovereignty, as contained in the UN Charter, is the ability of member states to address and resolve internal matters independently and without external pressure. In our engagement on the international stage, we hope for understanding and mutual respect, especially on important issues like national elections. Constructive dialogue and open channels of communication should be the pillars of our global interaction and not punitive, unilateral, cohesive measures that do not further the entrenchment of democracy, but instead strain relations between nations. Sierra Leone remains steadfast in its commitment to free, fair, and credible elections alongside our dedication to the rule of law. We believe that democratic progress is a journey, and its pace varies from one nation to another. We respect the individual paths countries have taken in their quest for democracy and anticipate the same level of understanding and respect for ours. We aspire to nurture relationships rooted in solidarity, cooperation, and mutual respect, all directed towards a shared global future. United Nations Security tenure. As Sierra Leone takes its non-permanent seat at the United Nations Security for the 2024-2025 term after a hiatus of 53 years, we are deeply aware of our shared duty to uphold international peace and security. The profound nexus between peace, development, and human rights will be the beacon guiding our priorities. We stand poised, resolute, and committed to forging a world where these ideas are not mere aspirations, but enduring realities for all. Sierra Leone fully subscribes to the ideas of multilateralism as a tool for global peace and security. Our vision is to serve as the vital conduit linking the ECOWAS community of the West African states, the African Union, and the nations in focus with the Security Council. As we yearn for tranquility and justice, we pledge our commitment to collaborate with the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, and as part of the 10 elected members and the 3 African representatives. Reform of the UN Security Council. Mr. President, Sierra Leone recognizes the pressing issue of Security Council's legitimacy, equitable representation, and transparency. In a world reshaped by geopolitical realities, true global peace and security hinge on reforms and the rejuvenation of United Nations Security Council and the UN General Assembly. Joined by fellow United Nations member states, Sierra Leone committed at the 2005 World Summit to support reforms of the Security Council as essential elements of our overall effort to reform the United Nations, to make it more broadly representative, efficient, transparent, and thus to enhance further its effectiveness and the legitimacy and implementation of its decisions. While the discourse has seen forward movement, the historical injustices endured by the African continent remain unresolved at the intergovernmental negotiations. Africa glaringly stands alone as the only region without permanent representation within the Security Council and is conspicuously unrepresented in its non-permanent category. The United Nations security remains trapped in the era of 1945, when much of Africa was still in the regrettable grip of colonialism. We must not allow this colonial ethos to persist 3/4 of a century later. Africa demands for 2 permanent seats, complete with commensurate rights, including the veto, is maintained, if maintained, and 5 non-permanent seats are issues of equity, justice, and our right to have an equal say in the decision-making on issues that affect the African region. Our conviction is steadfast. Security Council reform should squarely confront these long-standing inequity and imbalance, addressing Africa's unique circumstances. As the coordinator of the African Committee of 10 Heads of State and Government on the reform of the United Nations Security Council, Sierra Leone will continue to advocate and garner support among member states and other interest groups for the common African position as enshrined in the Eswatini Consensus and SADC Declaration. We will also envisage infusing the working methods of the Council to instill transparency, accountability, democracy, and ultimately renewed legitimacy. Climate change. Mr. President, our collective pursuit of sustainable development confronts the triple planetary crises of pollution, climate change, and biodiversity loss. Despite contributing minimally to these crises, Sierra Leone remains intensely vulnerable to their repercussions, a reality compounded by our limited capacity to cope. Our National Adaptation Plan, launched in 2018 as an embodiment of our commitment, designed to have our vulnerability by 2030, it underscores risk awareness, regulatory enhancement, institutional empowerment, and gender-responsive adaptation strategies. Sierra Leone seeks equitable and timely access to climate financing. We request unfettered access to leverage new climate change adaptation and mitigation technologies and shared knowledge. Our salvation from the escalating climate change crisis lies in collective wisdom and concerted efforts. Global solidarity. In today's complex world, the urgent need to rebuild trust and strengthen global unity stands out. We must adopt a cooperative approach, set aside individualistic actions, and promote shared progress based on common values. As we deal with disputes of sovereignty and self-determination across the world, we must also resolve to do so with dialogue, exhausting all avenues for peaceful resolution. Conclusion. In this evolving multipolar world, where conflicts ripple across borders and power dynamics are in flux, we must recognize our shared interests and intertwined destinies. The multifaceted crisis challenging our global community demands unified action. For our collective strength is determined by our most vulnerable segments. The voices we make today, the choices we make today, have far-reaching implications for tomorrow. We stand at a crossroads. One path takes us to mere rhetorical commitments to equity and solidarity, while the other beckons us to act with conviction, driven by profound belief in equity and justice, economic justice, social justice, political justice. Let us choose wisely, for the fate of generations to come hinges on the decisions we make now. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Sierra Leone for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Serene Highness Prince Albert II, Sovereign Prince of Monaco. I request protocol to escort Serene Highness, His Serene Highness. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Serene Highness Prince Albert II, Supreme Prince of Monaco, and to invite him to address the Assembly. Thank you.
Monsieur le Président,
President of the General Assembly, Secretary General, Heads of States and Governments, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, please allow me to express my heartfelt condolences to the authorities of Morocco and Libya in the wake of the devastating events in these two countries. I would like to express the solidarity and the support of Monaco to the people of Morocco and Libya who have shown courage and remarkable resilience in these particularly difficult times. In 1993, I was taking the floor for the first time from this rostrum as head of delegation of the Principality of Monaco. This was at the 48th session of the General Assembly. My country celebrated the 30th anniversary of its admission last spring. My determination to do that, to make sure that Monaco contributes to the implementation of the Charter, is heartened, strengthened by the fact that the current challenges oblige us to do that. This year, we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and I would like to welcome the commitment of Eleanor Roosevelt, who played a decisive role in drafting this historic document, aiming at making sure that every human being can have their inalienable rights. In the recent decades, the United Nations has achieved gains that only multilateralism can allow for. For example, the Agenda for Peace, which was passed during the Security Council Summit in 1992, Agenda for Development, General Assembly in 1997, Millennium Development Objective in 2000, Sustainable Development Objectives in 2015. It is through working together that we've been able to move forward quite so significantly. Mr. President, Monaco was an observer to the UN when my father, Prince Rainier III, decided to take part in the Rio Conference, in the wake of which we had the Agenda 21, which is customarily called the Rio Convention. And this participation in the Earth Summit was one of the trigger elements which resulted in the fact that the Principality started seeking full membership in the community of nations which gather here in this august chamber. The respect for the environment and wild fauna on land and sea and supporting science were fundamental priorities for the Princes of Monaco throughout the centuries. Today, what was a relentless commitment have become a duty for our survival. And that is why we signed the Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biodiversity, and then the Convention to Combat Desertification. These international treaties, they were added to thereafter, but they continue guided our action to preserve the planet from environmental disasters which can destroy all progress. In this regard, I would like to underscore to what extent the growing body of international law is the unsung success of our cooperation efforts within the UN, and recall that since our admission to the United Nations, we have become parties to 50 international treaties covering a large spectrum of topics such as human rights, disarmament, environment, or the law of the sea. In the course of this past year, the multilateralism in certain areas has shown once again its strength and its effectiveness because it continued and persevered. In December last, we have had a historic event when we adopted the Congy-Montreal Global Framework on Biodiversity. And then we concluded about 2 decades of negotiations by finalizing the Agreement on Biodiversity and High Sea, which I had the honor of signing. And this binding legal instrument will have another decisive step in protecting and safeguarding the seas and the oceans. And these victories, which came out of our collective efforts, have to give us hope, because above and beyond the ocean and the biodiversity, they also show the very potential of the United Nations to build common edifices for us to live better in harmony with nature. Furthermore, it seems fundamental to me to be aware of these new instruments because they give us powerful tools to combat climate change. Amongst the indigenous people or island people, the sea is a fully fledged being. The crucial role of seas and oceans in regulating climate is clearly recognized now and enables us to handle this challenge holistically. Because make no mistake, we will only able to gain the battle on climate if we work together towards the implementation of the SDGs that we have set ourselves 8 years ago. There is not a moment to lose. Extreme climate events, floods, droughts, fires, whose frequency and intensity is only growing, already result in the suffering of millions of people and require from us to undertake urgent and drastic measures. Physical modifications of the marine environment and coastal areas, the acidification of the ocean, rising sea levels are other phenomena which are threats for the very existence of coastal communities in many countries. Secretary General, your determination to bring together the leaders of states, representatives of private institutions, of civil society within the framework of the Climate Ambition Summit is very timely. The very recent IPCC report has alerted that it once again showed us that our collective efforts are insufficient in order to fight this planetary scourge. Several months ago, we have started the first stage of assessing the implementation of the Paris Agreement. This will be finalized at COP28, but it cannot be simply a statement of failure. We need to, on the contrary, use this most recent opportunity we have to rectify the trajectory so as to make sure we do not raise the temperature more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. Ladies and gentlemen, let's face facts. Serious changes to our ways of life and our collective organizations are needed, and needed fast. We need to redouble our solidarity so justice and equity become keywords of this phase of our transition. In this context, Monaco would like to play its part. The government of the Principality will contribute to the replenishment of the Green Climate Fund to the tune of 3.3 million euros for 2024-2027. This is a 10% increase compared to the previous period, and Monaco is already a #1 per capita donor into this fundamental instrument under the Paris Agreement. Mr. President, for more than a century, Monaco has shown how our man and sea can coexist. And the question of oceans will be once again, 2 years after Samoa Pathway, at the center of the deliberations of the 4th Conference on SIDS and the 3rd Conference on SDGs for Poland in Nice, presided by France and Costa Rica in 2025. Monaco decided, together with the organizers of this conference, to host sessions on blue economy, and the conclusions of that, I hope, will enrich the deliberations of this gathering. We do still have the unexplained phenomena of the cold stretch in the east of the Pacific Ocean, but the United Nations Decade on Ocean Sciences in the Service of Development provides us an opportunity to better understand the complex phenomena of climate change. Major countries have understood what needs to be done for our oceans. We are looking for water on Mars, but we had to wait for a generation to make sure that under the impetus of the president of the 77th GA, we had another conference on water last March. The young people of our nations place a very serious responsibility on us to make sure that we safeguard the air they breathe, the land where they grow, and the seas and the oceans, the cradles of humanity and key to our survival. And this fight will never be over. Mr. President, the conflict also undermined the environment and an additional obstacle to the implementation of the SDGs. It's been about 600 days now that Russia took the decision, in violation of international law, to launch a major-scale aggression against Ukraine. This was condemned several times by our Assembly, as well as humanitarian and environmental consequences. Here, yet once again, I'd like to express the solidarity of my country, given these tragic events and the destruction that the civilian population suffer every day. And the fights and the bombings resulted in pollution of soils and resulted in toxic substances. Natural areas have been destroyed, and there is now a shortage of drinking water and the spread of diseases. It is inconceivable that in the 21st century, healthcare professionals are regularly attacked, that medical infrastructures are attacked in various areas of conflict. So I appeal once again for the protection of these professionals and for the protection of civilian populations. The world is now beginning to recover after the pandemic of COVID-19. I would like to welcome, therefore, the fact that this week we'll have several high-level meetings on major public health issues. And we need to draw lessons from this pandemic so as to strengthen global governance and build resilient and strong public health systems. Mr. President, amongst the issues of existential threats that we are facing, there is one which has become very widespread recently, and I am referring to, of course, to artificial intelligence, which has in it both at the same time an immense potential for the SDGs and unprecedented risks for peace and security. Looking for innovation is part of our very nature and needs to be supported when it's geared towards improving the lives of our people. We are, of course, fascinated by the advantages provided by digital tools that simplify our daily life, but we cannot ignore the potential dangers they represent. Artificial intelligence very frequently is more effective than man in many tasks. But just like the language of Aesop, it could be the best and the worst thing for humankind. Cyber attacks using artificial intelligence are already targeting critical infrastructure in hospitals and humanitarian operations conducted by the UN. Security and weapons industries use these techniques, and their potential leads us to an ethical problem. Can a machine decide on the human issue of life and death? These questions show that we all have a duty to build a framework of global governance and ethical norms dealing with artificial intelligence. Therefore, concluding current works underway on this is of particular importance. I welcome, therefore, works aimed at creating a high-level advisory body on this within the UN to work on international governance over artificial intelligence. Mr. President, our role has always been the role of moderator in what has been a peaceful country, and I remain convinced of the central role to be played by the UN in rebuilding the trust and reawakening global solidarity. This requires common efforts anchored in the solid multilateral system, which is faithful to the values and principles in the Charter of the United Nations. I'll conclude by voicing the hope that we'll succeed in improving the effectiveness of our organization so that it can carry out its initial mission to safeguard peace amongst nations and the well-being of our common humanity. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Sovereign Prince of Monaco for the statement just made and request protocol to escort His Serene Highness. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Gabriel Boric Font, President of the Republic of Chile. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Gabriel Boric Font, the President of the Republic of Chile, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, distinguished representatives of the member states of the United Nations, we have the firm conviction that democracy is memory and future, and that's why in our country 9 days ago we commemorated 50 years since the coup d'etat of the 11th of September 1973, which violently split our coexistence, bringing death, persecution, pain and misery to my nation. The images of the presidential palace La Moneda being bombed the immolation of the democratically elected president of the country, Mr. Salvador Allende, and the self-evident truth that the then US government, headed by President Nixon, had conspired from the outset to promote the downfall of the Chilean government, touched the democratic conscience of the wider world. While some countries at that time were betting on instability of fragile and more robust democracies, there were international organizations such as the UN itself who played a fundamental role in defending human rights and democracy. Because from the very outset, they put it on the line to defend those who were suffering most, who were most vulnerable in Latin America and Chile and throughout the world. That is why United Nations and several of the countries here today, we have a great debt of gratitude to you. There were thousands who provided support to the persecuted, who saved lives, and who showed solidarity, which up to today we continue to commemorate on behalf of the victims of the Pinochet regime. Since then, my country has covered a great distance. We've come a long way. As Chilean citizens, we feel proud that we have come together to recover our democracy, restore our republic, and return to the path of human rights and fundamental freedoms, which had been founded by the founding fathers of our democracy. Chile is a country which loves and promotes peace. That is our identity, and that is what we choose to carry forward. 50 years after the tragedy which I've just outlined, we have borne our pain, and we have done so via initiatives such as the Redditch and the Balic Commissions and the Search Committee. But at the same time, Chile remains a country which is progressing because we've learned from the lessons of the past. We have analysed our past to build a better future, and it's through that learning that we can project ourselves into, we can see into the challenges of the future. One of those challenges where there is great agreement, having listened to the speeches which came before mine, is that the problems of democracy must be solved with more and never less democracy. A coup d'etat is never inevitable. Democracy always offers alternatives. We've also learned that human rights are an irrenounceable ethical basis in politics, and that human rights are of no individual party and must be defended in all places at all times, whatever the political colour of the government which undermines them. That is a principle which we have upheld and will continue to uphold, in particular as a member of the Human Rights Council. We have learned through our history that democracy is vulnerable, fragile, that it is not guaranteed forever, and therefore we must look out for it. That violence is not acceptable as a method of political action in democracy. That dialogue must always be the priority amongst those who have different views, and that applies also to relations between states. That is why I want to reiterate Chile's profound conviction and commitment to multilateralism and peaceful mechanisms for resolving conflicts. We have also learned, and I think it is important to highlight this at times of polarization, that when we manage to come together around shared goals, we can make progress in a shared and plural way to the benefit of all of our peoples. Because it's true to say, and you just have to follow the debates in my country to realize this, it's true that there are major differences of opinion in Chile today, but there are also major consensuses. And taken together, along with the four former presidents who are currently still alive, we have signed a firm commitment for the future of democracy and human rights in our country. And we invite other state leaders to join us in this effort. Even at the moments of most political turmoil, we are able to come together to seek ways out of our difficulties and which put our people ahead of our legitimate differences. That is why together, and I underscore this, together, both the government and the opposition are seeking paths forward to meet the demands of our people. The generations which came before us, ladies and gentlemen, assumed the responsibility of making our nations independent, of building democratic institutions, and creating leadership and universal human rights, and progressively moving forward on achieving social rights. My generation, which hadn't yet been born when the coup d'etat happened in 1973, it falls to us to consolidate and to enhance many of the achievements of the past at the same time as with optimism we tackle new threats and challenges ahead. Mr. President, distinguished members of the General Assembly, today there are three urgent tasks which I humbly today wish to bring to your attention and which my country thinks deserve our priority and which have already been mentioned by many in this General Assembly today. It is an urgent task, this is number one, that we look out for democracy, that we take care of it. We must put a stop to the advance of totalitarianism. We must be decisive in confronting disinformation, which is corroding our democracies from the inside. We must do it from an institutional and clear way. We must defend the rights of minorities, but also of those who are not minorities, who are in fact the majority, such as women, whose progress is threatened by various forms of totalitarianism and fanaticism. We must tackle the profound causes that are undermining our democracies. We are concerned that these vulnerabilities or the loss of democracy will take on new forms, not of the coup d'etats of the 20th century, but new forms in the 21st century, some of which may even have the sheen of majority to them. Democracy today is not satisfying all of the yearnings of people who urgently want and need security, greater equality, a way out of poverty. Democracy must be able to come up with results. We must pour all of our efforts into that. When institutions fail or are too slow in coming up with results, corruption and organised crime, various forms of inequality, all of these challenges which are corroding our institutions lead to a lack of trust among the people. That is why, ladies and gentlemen, looking after democracy means tackling the frustrations and the yearnings and the needs of our people. We have to channel them through the challenges which we face and make progress with shared action, greater freedom, more prosperity, social justice, sustainability. We must always put the collective interest ahead of individual interests, and in particular of the individual interests of those who have the most power, including ourselves as the governing class. In this regard, we also call for the strict respect of human rights as a path forward, regardless of who is in government. And as I've already said in other international fora, I feel the obligation to denounce in front of this Assembly and the world the persecution that is brought against all those who have any different thoughts or ideas than those of the government of Mr. Ortega in Nicaragua, who's not only impeding involvement in elections, but is removing citizenship, imposing house arrest and removing political rights. At the same time, ladies and gentlemen, we have to come together to reflect on the fact that any solution to all of these problems must arrive via multilateral consensus. And we must understand that when unilateral sanctions are imposed, That is not contributing towards the solution. The case of the sanctions against Venezuela, for example, from our perspective today, are not contributing to improving the life circumstances of the population of Venezuela, and we are convinced that to ensure that there are free elections with all the necessary safeguards for all in Venezuela, it is essential that the United States lift the sanctions which it has now imposed on Venezuela. The same applies to the sanctions which have been in place for so very long against Cuba. I want to be very clear. Declaring that Cuba is a country which promotes terrorism is not just false, it is violent, it is brutal, and we would call on the United States to follow the line which was taken a few years ago by the government of Barack Obama when it took Cuba off of that list. These sanctions hurt not the government of Cuba but the people who don't deserve it. At the same time, I feel obliged to raise my voice when it comes to two conflicts which are tearing apart humanity and which come to us from two different times. Some of you legitimately will be wondering why Chile wishes to discuss conflicts which are happening in such far-flung parts of the world. It's because humanity as a whole is important to us, and we should not remain silent when we see the illegal, for example, the illegal occupation of Palestine and the inability of Palestine to form its own state and government, the wall which is enclosing its citizens. We must recognize the right to exist of both of those countries, Palestine and Israel, and that is why at this podium we call for the respect of international law. A more recent conflict now, where also we see ambiguities which tend to come out when these events happen, and we must clearly condemn, explicitly condemn, the illegal invasion by Russia of Ukraine. On this point, it is our conviction that a conflict of this nature, of these characteristics, we cannot blame the invading government, the invading nation, in any way in the same way as the invaded nation, and we are convinced that peace can only be achieved by respecting the territorial integrity of nations. And we say that as a country which is a small or medium country, which is what we are, a country from the far south of the world. And we say it because we understand that countries such as ours depend on international law for our defence in potential future conflicts. Today it's Ukraine, in the future it could be any of us. And in this context, we can't close our eyes or look away. We cannot be ambiguous in condemning what, from our perspective, is a war of aggression, and a legal war of aggression at that. My second topic, requiring urgent action now, where responsibility, again, does not fall on all of us in the same way, is the climate change crisis, pollution and loss of biodiversity. Here, the diagnostic is very clear. Almost all of the leaders at this rostrum have spoken on this topic. These are problems of today, not tomorrow. In my country, we faced it with forest fires and other disasters, and we know that many of you, particularly the most vulnerable, those who have contributed least to global warming, are the ones who have suffered the most. The ones who have burned the least fossil fuels are the ones suffering the most from this climate crisis. And that is why we make a call, as we did earlier this morning at the high-level panel on this topic, for rapid action to accelerate the transition, to change our consumption, to establish new rules which allow us to meet these demanding challenges. In my country, we've made progress in that direction under different governments with different leadership. We have 43% of protected marine areas and a very high percentage of terrestrial protected areas. We've set up a number of protected areas, and we've also made commitments whereby at the very latest by 2050 we'll be climate neutral, if not before. However, climate change means that we are facing increasing and more complex challenges. Right now, it's a very severe drought, which, despite the rains of this year, which themselves brought problems flooding in areas that had lost, were no longer used to such rains, and we've also had forest fires. We are suffering a wide range of phenomena which have a direct impact on the most vulnerable. We understand that the same problems are happening elsewhere in the world. For example, the major floods recently in Libya, which the Secretary General and the President both mentioned in their addresses yesterday. Last year in Pakistan, there was a drought. In Argentina, in the Horn of Africa, in Central America. These are just a few examples which should move us into action now. And that is why we need to do more. I would make a call on the countries with greatest industrial activity to assume their full responsibility, not just to be more environmentally respectful, but also to show greater solidarity with those who are suffering most, such as the small Pacific Island nations, who are suffering the effects of climate change. Also Central America and the Caribbean, they are suffering the devastating effects of climate change, a crisis which we had no hand in causing. In Chile, we are putting all of our weight behind environmental agreements and making huge efforts since last year, for example, for an agreement to protect the oceans. This year we signed the BBNJ Convention, and today before this Assembly I wish to reiterate our commitment and willingness for Valparaiso, the historic gateway to America, the Pearl of the Pacific, to become the headquarters of that treaty's secretariat. You can count on us for its proper development and to contribute to a more sustainable and fairer, more equitable development. Finally, the third challenge, which I think has to be a priority, relates to technological change, which can only be compared with the Industrial Revolution of the mid-18th century, which will change entirely the way that we think, that we relate, that we produce, that we work. Only a few weeks ago, we saw in a small town in Spain how a few hours ago, in fact, how a mother had to report to the police how a group of boys at school had taken images of her daughter and, using artificial intelligence, created pornographic images of her daughter and distributed them. The world is changing. People have a right to privacy, to their integrity. All changes in technology